A very interesting writer is the Romanian Grandmaster Mihail Marin. He has written opening books, for example, about the English opening, about the Pirc defense. He has also written books such as Learning from the Legends, probably his most famous work, and Learning from Bent Larsen. But I have been very attracted of this book, Old Wine in New Bottles, because here he really emphasizes the classics. This book was published by Sahovski Informator in 2019, and it's a very nice front cover, and the whole book contains beautiful pictures by famous artists. So Mihail Marin, he looks like this. He has written an interesting foreword, and he's explaining what the reader could expect from this book. He says, for example, that it's virtually impossible to write a complete chess course, as the general themes and examples to each of them are practically inexhaustible. But I hope that after studying the book, the reader will feel enriched technically and aesthetically. So he means that this book will improve your playing strength, because it will improve your technique, and you will also have great pleasure from reading it. Contents. So first we have this foreword by Marin, System of Signs. This is typical for this informant system. Part 1 deals with basic principles. Chapter 1, a few twin games and one golden rule, development. Chapter 2, strong king in the center. And for me this is a very interesting chapter, because for the moment on Chesslovers Advanced I'm focusing on the pieces. So I have started a course, and the king is the main piece. How you can make the king useful and not only think about the king as a piece that should always be safe. I think this is a very interesting topic, and Marin discusses this topic, but I'm more extreme, because he's mainly discussing when the king is positioned in the center, but I will also show examples, especially with Karpov, when the king is placed on the 4th rank. So how big risks can you take with the king and still survive? This is extremely and still very much underestimated topic. There are not so many books dealing with pieces. So we can have a little look into that chapter. So it's chapter 2, strong king in the center. And then he writes, this chapter comes as the other side of the coin with respect to the previous one, which was about development, in which the king in the center was mainly a target and a cause of worries. One of Steiner's favorite ideas when publishing his views about positional play was that the king as a fighting unit is strong enough to take care of himself, and that keeping it in the center would make sense in order to achieve certain strategic goals. The first world champion was the kind of man who would go even further than just preaching, by advocating his ideas with his own games. So he practiced his ideas, but related to the theme mentioned above, the games are not very convincing. And then he means this game that was played between Steinitz and Falk in Moscow 1896. And yeah, he played the Steinitz gambit, as it's called, e4, e5, knight c3, knight c6, f4, e takes f4, d4, queen h4 check, king e2. But after 9 moves, the king is on f2, so he's close to an artificial castling on the king's side. And Steinitz won the game after 25 moves. And after the game, he writes that, as mentioned above, Steinitz games do not look very convincing for the next generations, and this was mainly because of his opponents. They didn't play the strongest move. The same destiny that happened to Morphy. But at the same time, there is a lot of truth in his abstract statement, that the king can take care of itself. It can be active on its own. I would compare him with those ancient prophets who could see or feel things that were going to happen many years later, but could not express them very clearly, as they did not have enough means and reference points in their era to do so. If we refer to Steinitz by means and reference points, we should understand the stage of the opening theory at that time. And then he goes on to discuss a modern game played between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So in Vacancy 2018. And as you can see here, I have put 3 exclamation marks on that game. And that is very rare. I normally put 2 exclamation marks. So if I put 3, then it's really something special. So what happened was that Wesley So gave a check by playing 6, bishop b4 check. And in that position, Carlsen had to play king d1. So you can see a diagram here after a couple of moves. Yeah, here is the correct diagram. So the king is placed on d1 in the center. And later on, it's stationed on e2, but still relatively safe, because there are pawns on e5 and f4. But in this position, this is extraordinary. Here he plays the extraordinary move e6. He's sacrificing a pawn because he wants to avoid black to open lines on the king side. So he's sacrificing a pawn to be able to play with his king in a useful manner. I shall show you what I mean. And it's this position. You can see the diagram here. So here he protects the pawn on f4 by playing king f3. This is extraordinary. And it's very rare. And he shows some other games where Magnus Carlsen is involved and where he plays actively with the king, because he plays king e7. He also shows some game with Karpov, and Karpov has played actively with his king in many games. So you can see this book as a middle game book. And then in part 2, he deals with tactics. Chapter 1, is chess a matter of memory? And he does not mean now necessarily that you should remember opening variation. It's rather a matter of remembering strategic and tactical patterns. That is the key things to remember. And he exemplifies with Lasker's double bishop sacrifice, this famous game between Lasker Bauer that was played in Amsterdam 1989, And then he also analyzes this game between Nimswich Tarash that was played in St. Petersburg 1914 and some modern games. So we have this old wine in new bottles. Chapter 2, the Achilles heel of the chessboard, f7, f2, weak points. And here I also saw some interesting example I can show you. First of all, a very nice painting here, very nice picture. The book is full of them. And the position I was going to show you, you can see here, move 37. So here, Karjakin played the fatal move rook b5. His idea is to play rook f5 to increase the pressure on the pin rook on f7. And after knight f6, white could perhaps prepare a pawn storm with g4, h4, g5, etc. But rook b5 was a big mistake because black can only pick king h8. So Karjakin apparently forgot that after bishop takes f7, the rook didn't have any protection anymore. So black could just reply queen takes b5. So such things can happen when you are so focused on one particular square or point that you sometimes forget the importance of another point or square. So part 2 deals with tactics. Chapter 3, b4 pawn, a brave foot soldier. Then part 3, it deals with strategy. Chapter 1, exchanging the double pawns. Chapter 2, removing an outpost by an exchange sacrifice. Chapter 3, the positional queen sacrifice and the strong passed pawn. Chapter 4, the central pawn's attack. A systematic plan or just a matter of time and nuance. Chapter 5, first among equals, squeezing water out of dry stone. Chapter 6, the double pawn's strength and weakness in static positions. So there are middlegame themes we are dealing with, mainly. Part 4 then deals with the attack. Chapter 1, attacking with simple moves. Chapter 2, exchanging queens during a sacrificial attack. Chapter 3, the necessity to attack. Chapter 4, e5 takes f6. How dramatic can it be? Part 5 then, mid-game plans of specific openings. And I think this is one of Marin's strengths because he's very interested in openings. And here he deals in chapter 1 with the hedgehog. Chapter 2, pianissimo or fortissimo. So he's talking about the Italian game. So if you move the pawn to d3, it's pianissimo, or if you move the pawn to d4, it's fortissimo. So he's using these musical terms. Chapter 3, fire on board, Cecilia Schweningen structure. Chapter 4, son of sorrow. I can also tell you that Marin also has a channel on YouTube, and he has one video where he speaks specifically about the hedgehog. And also in his videos, he has this concept of old wine in new bottles. So he's using old classical games, which for him represent forgotten ideas, and you can put them in a modern context. You can use many of these ideas, and many of these ideas, modern ideas we think are modern, have already been discovered. For example, it's well known when we talk about the hedgehog that this was mainly Ulf Andersson and Jobojevich's invention, and that Bobby Fischer was the inspiration because Fischer played a game against Ulf Andersson in the early 70s. And with the white pieces, he played a hedgehog position and won a beautiful game. It's a very famous game. But as Marin has proved in this video, is that the hedgehog position was already discovered by, for example, Salo Flor in the 30s. And Salo Flor played this idea. He hinted on this idea to play rook g8 and g5 because he played king h8 in one game. But now he managed to play d5 under favorable circumstances. And he even mentions a game from the 1920s where Fritz Selmisch was playing the hedgehog. So this is what I really like with Marin. He has full awareness of classical games. And most chess players are not aware of historical games. And one reason is, of course, due to the computer. So it's very important that you can find such information and knowledge in chess books. Like, for example, this one, Old Wine in New Bottles. And then in the last part of this book, part 6, he deals with the individual and joint abilities of the pieces. And this part of the book I really enjoy as well, because I think this is, as I have mentioned before, is a very underestimated area in chess to talk about the capabilities of the pieces. The discussion is normally stopped. I mean, you know the approximate value of each piece and you know the movements, but that is not enough. You must go beyond the value of the piece. You must go beyond the movements of the piece. And then chapter 1 deals with the versatility of the knight. Chapter 2 are all rook endings till drawn. Chapter 3, the unfaithful queen. Chapter 4, the ninth endgame extravaganza. Chapter 5, a rare but thrilling endgame. Chapter 6, the Spanish knights, and then about the author. So, if you are interested in Middlegame themes, which involves both classical and modern games, this book is definitely one such book. And I emphasize this book because this kind of book is rare, but also typical for the Romanian Grandmaster Mihail Marin. So this is a really good one. And what is good with this book is that you don't need to read everything. You can read in whatever order you want. You read what you are interested in. So I have started to read, for example, part 1, chapter 2, Strong King in the Center. And I'm also going to read this last part of the book, where he's dealing with the pieces, the individual and joint abilities of the pieces. Because such themes I'm very interested in, but I haven't read so much about these themes because they are difficult to find in books. So acquire this book. It should be available on Sahovski Informator, the company located in Belgrade, Serbia.